story, the candidates crisscross the Empire State.
God bless the great state of New York.
I love being in Brooklyn. This is great.
Throughout the world, no matter where you go, they love New York.
Today, a preview of Tuesday's primary with Donald Trump's campaign manager.
Our goal is to get 1,237 or more going into that convention.
Corey Lewandowski on the controversy over Michelle Fields.
This is a huge distraction for the campaign, and it should never have been.
And his evolving role in the campaign. It's a Fox News Sunday exclusive. Plus, the Democrats brawl in Brooklyn.
I question a judgment which voted for the war in Iraq.
President Obama trusted my judgment enough to ask me to be Secretary of State.
We'll ask our Sunday panel how Sanders and Clinton's personal attacks will play with New York voters. Then, growing concern the Zika virus is worse than we thought.
The more and more we learn, the more and more you get concerned about the scope of what this virus is doing.
We'll get the latest from the government's point man on infectious disease, Dr. Anthony Fauci, on what you can do to protect yourself. And our Power Player of the Week, the Navy's first female admiral still breaking barriers.
I said, hey, I need women four-star shuttle boards. And she goes, there aren't any.
All right now on Fox News Sunday. And hello again from Fox News in Washington. New Yorkers go to the polls Tuesday in the next big primary for both parties. 95 Republican delegates and 247 Democratic delegates are at stake. And the two frontrunners, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, are both counting on big victories there. We'll speak with Trump's controversial campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, in a moment. But first, let's bring in Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry with the state of the race on both sides. Ed.
Chris, Donald Trump is still dominating the presidential race, but hit some new roadblocks late yesterday in Wyoming, where Ted Cruz swept all 14 delegates while Trump was shut out, raising new questions about his organizational strength and whether he can get the delegates needed to seal the nomination before the convention. Trump repeated his charges the system is simply rigged, but added a new threat for party leaders.
The Republican National Committee, they better get going, because I'll tell you what, you're going to have a rough July at that convention. You better straighten out the system, because the people want their vote.
On the Democratic side, both Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders are back in New York after two very different side trips. Sanders traveled to Rome for the prestige of pushing his anti-Wall Street message at a Vatican conference, then a surprise meeting with Pope Francis, though the pontiff seriously downplayed it by telling reporters it was a polite handshake. Clinton was in California raising big money with George and Amal Clooney. She can't quite shake Sanders, but is trying to look past him by attacking Trump.
When Trump calls people who work hard, calls them criminals, that just sets people against each other. When he goes after women, that is also a signal to pay attention to. When he goes after Muslims, we know that he's playing to the basest of our instincts.
Clinton up double digits in her adopted home state. She hopes to put Sanders in mathematical peril. A source close to Trump, meanwhile, tells me after what they expect to be a big win in New York, his allies want to start dubbing him the, quote, presumptive Republican nominee to inject an air of inevitability. Chris?
Ed, thanks for that. Joining me now from New York is Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski. Mr. Lewandowski, Corey, I'm going to call you that. Let's start, because I guess we have to, with the saga over your encounter with Michelle Fields after a Trump news conference back in March. Here's what she said. Someone had grabbed me tightly by the arm and yanked me down. I almost fell to the ground, but was able to maintain my balance. Here's what you tweeted to Fields. You are totally delusional. I never touched you. And here's the video from that night, which shows you clearly did grab her, but not as violently as she said. Do you now acknowledge that you did touch Miss Fields and that she is not delusional?
Well, no. What I acknowledge is the sum total of my relationship with Miss Fields was caught on that videotape. She's an individual I had never met before, had never spoken to before, and candidly, I didn't remember the incident. The whole incident lasted less than 3 seconds, and it was me moving from one location to another location. I would have remembered if I tried to violently throw someone to the ground, or if there was an incident which would have been memorable, and there wasn't. And I tried to contact Miss Fields after I read on her boyfriend's Twitter feed that something took place that evening. But to this day, I've never heard from Mrs. Fields or Miss Fields. So, I am happy that the Palm Beach County District Attorney has decided not to move forward with any charges. I'm happy this is behind us, and I'm happy to move forward with the campaign.
A couple of points I want to make. One, first of all, she says that she has no record that you ever tried to reach her, doesn't have a record of your phone, doesn't have a message that was left. In addition, as we both have pointed out, the Palm Beach prosecutor said that there's not enough evidence and enough chance for success to actually go ahead and prosecute the case. But on the other hand, Fields has left open the possibility of a civil suit for defamation against you and against Trump. In the interest of avoiding unnecessary litigation, which I know Republicans don't like, are you prepared here and now to apologize to Ms. Fields for touching her and for saying that she was delusional?
Well, here and now, what I'd like to say is, again, I've never spoken to Ms. Fields. And so, I turned over my phone record to the Palm Beach County District Attorney's office. It clearly shows I called her phone number that evening when I got back and read about this on the Twitter feed. I'd be happy to have a conversation with her. But to apologize to someone I've never spoken to and candidly don't ever remember having any interaction with, I think is something that is a little unrealistic right now. But I have said and be happy to say again, this is a person I've never spoken to, but I'd be happy to have that conversation if we can put this thing behind us.
Okay. Let's turn to something almost as important, and that is the election of the next president of the United States. Ted Cruz picked up 14 delegates in Wyoming last night, while Donald Trump, your man, picked up 0. While Trump still leads Cruz by 185 delegates, this might be the better way to look at it. Trump now has 744 delegates. All the non-Trump delegates combined total 890. Corey, I don't have to tell you, you need a majority, 50% plus 1 of the delegates to reach the magic number of 1237 to cinch the nomination. At this point, you have 45%.
Well, we do, but look, the best states for Donald Trump are in front of us. And when he started this race on June 16th, many people didn't take him seriously, said he wasn't going to be a factor, and he went on to win in New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada. And then he went down and cleaned up in the SEC and dominated against a sitting senator in the state of Florida. And what we know is on Tuesday in his home state of New York, I think Ted Cruz is going to come in third place most likely, and Donald Trump's going to do very well in the delegate count there. Then we'll go to the Northeast, where you have states like Connecticut and Rhode Island and Pennsylvania, Maryland. We're going to do very, very well there. And I think by the end of this month, in the next 2 weeks, Donald Trump will add an additional 200 delegates to his total. He is the presumptive front runner right now. He is the presumptive nominee going forward. And Ted Cruz is going to be mathematically eliminated from securing 1,237 delegates by next Tuesday. And if that's the case and everyone has the same goal, which is to put a Republican inside the White House for the first time in 8 years, then they should unite behind Donald Trump to make that happen.
Well, you talk about uniting, but Trump has done his fair share of dividing inside the party. I want to talk to you about that. He's been complaining for the last couple of weeks about states like Wyoming and Colorado, which did not hold statewide primaries or caucuses. Here he is.
This is a dirty trick, and I'll tell you what, the RNC, the Republican National Committee, they should be ashamed of themselves for allowing this kind of crap to happen.
But RNC Chairman Reince Priebus fired back, quote, nomination process known for a year and beyond. It's the responsibility of the campaigns to understand it. Complaints now? Give us all a break. Corey, aren't you and Trump blaming the RNC and Cruz for the fact that they knew the rules and played by them and you didn't? And in fact, isn't all the blame on you, not on the RNC and Cruz?
Well, here's the problem with the rules. These rules are so arcane that they're stopping people who want to go and vote and giving them the opportunity to vote.
But they are the rules, and you would agree they have been the rules for months.
But here's the problem with the rules. Here's the problem with the rules. Let me give you one example. In the state of Florida, Donald Trump dominated and won by 23 points over all of his competitors down there, and he was awarded 99 delegates under the party rules. Of those 99 delegates, the chairman of the party of Florida, who was an avid and outward supporter of Marco Rubio, gets to appoint 30 of those delegates. Now, I understand those are the rules, but Donald Trump won. And now you've got a person who is supporting Marco Rubio who gets to appoint 30 of the 99 delegates. That's not what the rules should be. The rules should be that Donald Trump won 99 delegates, and all 99 people, while they are bound on the first vote, we should have the opportunity to appoint those people. So those are the rules, and I understand, and we understand what the rules are. But the bottom line is Ted Cruz does well in places where party bosses get to set those rules, and the people don't get to go and vote. Now, I understand that that's the process, but here's another example. In some places, those delegates are chosen based on how much money they've given to the party, whether they've run for statewide office, and how much volunteering they have done. I understand that those are the rules, but there are people out there who don't have the privilege of writing a check to the state party or running for statewide office, but their vote should count just the same, and they're precluded from being a delegate based on a scoring system because they haven't been involved for the last 25 years. That's everything that's wrong with the party system, and that's everything that's wrong with the electoral system. What we see is Donald Trump is bringing millions of more people out to vote. We see the lines 3, 4, 5 hours long to stand in line so they can vote on Election Day. And then when he is given that opportunity and people are given the opportunity to go vote, he dominates in those elections. So that's what the rules should really be.
So I want to ask you about the clip that Ed Henry just played. What did Trump mean last night when he warned the RNC that they could be in for, quote, a rough July at the convention?
Well, I think what he's saying is he's going to be the Republican nominee, and anything that they're going to try and do, potentially try and do to stop him from being that, is going to be detrimental. There is one person in this race that still is running that is not mathematically eliminated from getting 1,237 delegates, and that's Donald Trump. And the RNC should respect that, bring the people around him, because the explicit goal of the RNC, and ours is the same, is putting a Republican in the White House for the first time in 8 years.
But when you say
the only person that can do that is Donald Trump.
But when you say rough July, and Trump says that, and when he talked about riots, I mean, is that what we're discussing? Is the possibility of violence in Cleveland if he doesn't get the nomination?
No, what we're talking about is a fractured party. What we're talking about is millions of people who've turned out to support Donald Trump, and now they're saying potentially they're going to try and take this away from Donald Trump at a convention. That's not what we're about. We're supposed to be bringing the party together. We're supposed to be growing the party. We're supposed to be expanding the map. As you look at the electoral map, I challenge you and anybody else to tell me a state that Mitt Romney won, that Mitt Romney lost, that Ted Cruz can win. He can't do that. Donald Trump is the only person that's going to be able to expand the map and beat the Democrats come November. And if the party wants a winner, then they need to support Donald Trump.
All right. A couple of quick questions in the time we have left. One, are you going to sweep all 95 delegates in New York on Tuesday?
Well, I think that's a tall task. And if you look at what Ted Cruz did when he was running the state of Texas, he took about 48% of the delegates there at the time. He took 48% of the vote there. I think we're going to do much better than that. But, you know, I don't want to guarantee 100%. I think we're going to do very, very well in New York, though.
Finally, you talk about fractures in the party. There are some fractures in the Trump campaign. He has, your boss, has in effect set up a parallel campaign structure here in D.C. with Paul Manafort, a longtime Republican operative. While officially he's in charge of delegate hunting, I got to tell you, a lot of people close to the campaign say that below Trump, and clearly Trump is the head guy, that below Trump, he's running the show, not you. What's the story there?
Let me say this. I'm grateful that Paul is on board. He has a proven track record of getting delegates. We're bringing in a larger team, and that's part of the natural maturation of a campaign. We had a great senior staff meeting yesterday. We brought on Rick Wiley, who I've been speaking to for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks before he finally came on board. We're going to continue to grow our team. We're going to continue to do outreach. We have run a small, lean, efficient campaign. We have done more with less than all the other candidates combined. It's now time to grow and make sure that we have the best people available so that not only can we get to 1237 and be the nominee, but ultimately the goal here is to become the President of the United States on behalf of Mr. Trump. So in order to do that, we need to grow. And if you look at the size of these other campaigns, you know, Hillary Clinton has 700 or 800 people in our Brooklyn headquarters. We've been so small and lean. Now is the time to grow. We've got a great cohesive team, and it's an honor to be able to work with all these people moving forward.
Corey, thank you. Thanks for your time. We'll be tracking the results in New York Tuesday night.
Thank you so much.
Up next, we'll bring in our Sunday group to discuss the Battle of New York in both parties and the war inside the GOP over how delegates are chosen.
Anger and really hatred.
The phrase New York values actually came from Donald Trump. You guys have been suffering under the misguided policies of liberal Democratic politicians a long, long time.
Donald Trump and Ted Cruz continuing their running argument over New York values. And it's time now for our Sunday group. Syndicated columnist George Will, Julie Pays, who covers the White House and the campaign for the Associated Press, Laura Ingram, editor of LifeZette, and Rebecca Berg from Real Clear Politics. Laura, Trump has been complaining for weeks, and we heard some more of it today from his campaign manager about the delegate rules in some states. But I felt this week he started to make an interesting pivot, saying the fact that Cruz is beating him on the rules somehow shows that Cruz isn't the outsider he says he is. In fact, he's an insider. Is that going to work to sort of say that the failure of planning by the Trump campaign really is a mark against Ted Cruz?
Well, I think both sides are playing the cards that are probably the smartest cards for them to play. I mean, you can make the case against what Trump is saying. I mean, if you want to beat the establishment, if you want to win the presidency, you have to know the rules. Yeah, you have to get in there. You have to have your slates of delegates. In places like California, you got 53 districts there. You have to present your own slate of delegates in each district. Looks like there Cruz is really doing the work, the groundwork. At the same time, I think it's smart for Trump to say, well, why are these people rallying around Ted Cruz if, in fact, he's the outsider that's really going to turn Washington upside down, as he claims? I don't really blame Trump for making that argument, because this is the last stretch of this campaign, and he is going to have an impressive win, undoubtedly, on Tuesday. He's poised to win Maryland. He's poised to win Delaware, Connecticut, Rhode Island.
Those are a week from today.
Well, they're coming up, but he's poised to win a lot of states. But you look at California, that is the one that I'm focusing on. That's 53 districts. 3 delegates in each district. Congressional district. He has to have 3 really reliable, good people in each district. Does he have that? I'm not sure. Cruz has had a lot on the ground for a long time in California.
Well, let's take a look at that, Julie, because as we pointed out in the last couple of weeks in these closed conventions, not statewide caucuses or primaries, Cruz has done very well, has basically shut out Trump in Colorado and in Wyoming. But as you look at the primary map, Trump is scheduled, it seems like he's going to do very well in New York, and then the following week in Pennsylvania and other states along the East Coast. Your sense, his prospects for getting to 1237, the majority before Cleveland?
One advantage that he has right now is he's the only one who can get to 1237. So that puts him in a better position than his rivals. He does have to have a very strong night in New York, not just in the popular vote, but in the delegate count. If you look at the states later this month in the Northeast, he looks to be in a strong position. He needs to win in a state like Indiana that offers a big delegate haul next month. California is crucial, though. And to Laura's point, you can have an overall popular vote victory in California. You get 13 delegates for that. 13. This is a congressional district game that he needs to be playing.
Yeah, let me just quickly explain that, because this is true in New York as well. If you get over 50%, you get the statewide delegates. In New York, I think it's 14. But then there's a separate race in each congressional district. If you get over 50%, you get all 3 delegates in that congressional district. If you don't, if you get 49%, you get 2, and the second person gets 1.
And if you're in a tight delegate race with Ted Cruz, that could be enough to allow Cruz to stop you. Now, Trump's people have been saying in Washington this week they can get 1265, which would put them over the top after California, but that is going to be a real organizational challenge for them.
George, I want to ask you about the other aspect, which I turned to Corey about, talked to him about at the very end of our discussion, and that is this dual campaign operation that seems to be going on in Trump. Corey put the best face on it, but there is a sense of tension between the original group, like Corey Lewandowski and the team he put together, and this new, more establishment group like Paul Manafort, somebody who you and I have known since the Reagan years, and he's put together an operation here in D.C., and they're starting also to reach out to members of Congress. Is it smart to set this up? Should he have done it a long time ago?
It is smart, and he's very late to the party, literally to the party. I mean, he became a Republican sort of on June 15th. Before that, he was a funder of Democrats, and he had positions that were indistinguishable from the Democrats. What's puzzling about this is that on the one hand, he's coming to Washington and saying, I want to get to know you, and I want to deal with the leaders of the party. On the other hand, he says what happens in Casper, Wyoming, and Colorado Springs, Colorado, is too ruthless for me to handle. This is a man who boasts that he has thrived in the cutthroat New York City real estate market, boasts that he has done so by paying off politicians. And he finds Casper, Wyoming, mysterious.
All right. Meanwhile, on the Democratic side, they had quite a debate in Brooklyn this week between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. Here's a taste of it.
I stood up against the behaviors of the banks when I was a senator. I called them out on their mortgage behavior.
Secretary Clinton called them out. Oh, my goodness. They must have been really crushed by this. Was that before or after you received huge sums of money by giving speaking engagements behind them?
Rebecca, your thoughts about the debate and where the Democratic race stands now?
Well, I think that segment that you just played, Chris, illustrates perfectly why it is damaging to Hillary Clinton that Bernie Sanders is staying in this race, even as she is the likely nominee for the Democratic Party at this point, in spite of some victories for him that are likely down the road. You're going to keep seeing these attacks on Hillary Clinton that would be very potent in a general election setting. Republicans could very easily take that clip, use it in an ad in the general election in the same way that they can use his remarks about Hillary Clinton being unqualified for the presidency. These remarks can be very damaging for Hillary Clinton in the long term, and so I think that's why you see her now ratcheting up the attacks on Bernie Sanders, not because she dislikes him personally necessarily, not because she necessarily feels threatened.
From that debate, she
probably was a little bit annoyed. But it's really not necessarily an issue of her feeling threatened by him in terms of losing the nomination to him. But he is now at a stage where he is becoming damaging to her in a general election context, and she's hoping to push him out of this race as soon as possible.
That's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you, Laura, because I wonder, I think we would all agree, I mean, she still has a lead. If it just pledged delegates of more than 200, if you include the unpledged, the super delegates of more than 600. So the nomination doesn't seem in jeopardy, but is he damaging her going forward to the general election, staying in, attacking her, and also, maybe most importantly, pushing her to the left on some issues?
She's moved to the left clearly in a way that I think it's uncomfortable for what the Clinton legacy was, at least Bill Clinton's legacy on trade and all these issues. But when you look at the likability numbers for Hillary, that's where you really see the divide. So Bernie's much more likable. Hillary's leading in the delegate count. And then you have those images that you had in New York last week at NYU at the Arch and that unbelievable rally for Bernie at Washington Square. And it's just an unbelievable rally for him, the reverberations through the city. You heard the echo of Sanders and this Democrat kind of attempt at populism and a populist message against Wall Street, which, of course, Hillary has cozied up to for many years, made millions and millions of dollars from the Clintons' association with Wall Street. I think it really hurts Hillary, and I think all these polls where people are saying, well, Trump can never beat Hillary, or Cruz is vulnerable. I think Hillary's the one who's vulnerable, and I think all bets are off on these projections about which Republicans can beat Hillary, given how, I think, damaged she seems in this whole process. I think she looks really tired. I don't think she looks inspired, and I think Bernie Sanders is probably going to be one of the Republicans' best friends when it comes to November.
All right, panel, we have to take a break here. We'll see you a little later. Up next, as public health officials sound the alarm over the growing threat of the Zika virus in the U.S., a new battle is brewing over government funding. We'll talk with Dr. Anthony Fauci, the government's point man on infectious disease, about what you can do to protect yourself from Zika. This week, health officials here in the U.S. confirm the Zika virus causes severe birth defects in babies born to infected mothers. And they're asking for almost $2 billion to deal with the crisis, setting off a funding battle between the White House and Congress. Joining me now is the government's point man in fighting Zika, Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Dr. Fauci, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good to be with you.
I want to put up the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control map to show, and let's put it up on the screen, the states across the country where the mosquitoes that carry the Zika virus have previously been found. How serious is the threat in that blue shaded area, basically the southern half of the country this summer and this spring and summer?
Well, it is likely we will have what's called a local outbreak. Right now, we have in continental USA, we have over 350 imported cases, namely people who've traveled to a region, gotten infected, and came back. The concern is once one comes back, would a mosquito, which you saw on that map, bite someone and then locally transmit it to someone who's never left the country? It would not be surprising at all, if not likely, that we're going to see a bit of that because we've seen similar types of things with other similar types of infection like dengue. We've been able to control it so that it doesn't become sustained or widespread. But the threat of at least having some local outbreak is likely, I would think. It's up to us now to make sure when it happens, we contain it.
Now, you've used a couple of words in that answer that struck me. A bit of an outbreak, local outbreak. So are we talking about hundreds of cases?
No.
We're talking about thousands of cases? And also, is there a threat, because I read somewhere this week that there can also potentially be a threat of brain damage to adults?
Right, exactly. So there are a couple of issues you brought up that are important. When we say local, we talk not about thousands of cases. We're talking about scores of cases, dozens of cases at the most that historically with dengue were able to be contained. The other interesting thing that's important is that it is sexually transmitted. And there's another mention to that it can be sexually transmitted. So there's an issue there of someone who can transmit it who has absolutely to someone who's not been bitten by a mosquito. Now, the other thing you mentioned very quickly is that in addition to the Guillain-Barré, which is kind of a hypersensitivity reaction following the infection, we see that with things like influenza. We're also seeing some disturbing indication, there are only individual case reports, of significant neurological damage to people, not just the fetuses, but an adult that would get infected, things that they call meningoencephalitis, which is an inflammation of the brain and the covering around the brain, spinal cord damage due to what we call myelitis. We're starting to see them. We don't know how frequent it's going to be. So far, they look unusual, but at least we've seen them, and that's concerning.
One sensitive issue, I know, for public health officials like yourself, is whether to advise women to delay pregnancy in areas of the country where we may see an outbreak, even if it's a localized outbreak of the virus. What should women do?
Well, right now in the United States, there should not be that concern. We do not have local transmission here. So I think the idea about people in the continental United States delaying pregnancy is not even an issue for discussion at this point. The issue is when you're dealing in countries in which you have outbreaks, like in South America, particularly Brazil or Puerto Rico, there's a concern about what you might advise women. Right now, the recommendations from the CDC are consult your physician about the kinds of options you might have, but a direct recommendation to delay has been given by countries. For example, El Salvador has actually said you should delay if you could. The confounding issue, Chris, about that tree control, things that comes that question.
If we begin to see localized outbreaks here in the United States, besides birth control, what can men and women do to protect themselves?
And that's a great question. Protect yourself against mosquitoes, and that you can do that. The government and local authorities can do it by cleaning up the environment to not allow mosquitoes to breed. They breed in still water, pots, pans, tires, or what have you. But the critical issue is, if this country, we do have that, stay indoors if you can with air conditioning and screen. When you're outdoors, dress in a way that covers most of your body, but use DEET-containing insect repellents. DEET at 30% is safe. It's safe for a woman who's pregnant. It's safe for babies older than 6 months old. We shouldn't hesitate to use insect repellent.
Now, there's quite a battle here in Washington, and we really began to see it this week over government funding. You and the administration, public health officials have asked for $2 billion. To do what?
Well, it's $1.9 billion, 1.5 for HHS, which involves the Centers for Disease Control, particularly the Centers for Disease Control, about $800 million for Puerto Rico, for international, but particularly for domestic. And that's a variety of things. Insect control, mosquito control, we at NIH developing a vaccine, which is very important, public health measures, educational campaigns. So there's been delineated the kinds of things to do, and it's divided among different agencies within HHS as well as USAID and the State Department.
Okay. Now, as I say, you've asked for $1.9 billion as far back as February. This week, the administration announced it is transferring almost $600 million that were mostly in Ebola funds to go address this. But you're asking for the full $1.9 billion, and there's a sharp disagreement about the rest. Here, take a look.
This is going to be leading all your news broadcasts. This is going to be on the front page of newspapers across the country. And I don't know what Republicans are going to say that they did to prepare for it.
We will address this situation through the regular appropriations process as the need arises, and our appropriators are looking at how to do just that.
Now, congressional Republicans say that the plan that the administration has submitted so far is basically an outline. It's not a detailed plan. And the head of the House Appropriations Committee, a fellow named Hal Rogers, Republican from Kentucky, he says that basically it's a slush fund.
Yeah. Well, obviously, we disagree with that. I mean, when we put together what we would be doing, and we'd be more than happy to go over it even in more detail with them, but we have put together essentially a project-by-project approach of what we would do. I can tell you with regard to what I am responsible for, namely the development of a vaccine, we know exactly how we're going to spend that in a success development Zika vaccine.
Just on that clip, well, get it in the regular appropriations process. Is that satisfactory, or do you need it to be dealt with more urgently?
Well, the reason is we have to act now, Chris. And the regular appropriation process, a good process, is one that takes time. So we have to move now. I can't wait to start developing a vaccine. We have to do it. And in order to do it, you need money. And that's the reason for the urgency of getting that money.
Now, you have said that when the president called for $2 billion, $1.9 billion, that you needed the $1.9 billion. What do you see as the fallout? What if you don't get that money? What if Congress doesn't appropriate it?
Well, if we don't get the money, we have to do important areas. We can't just not address this. This is really a very important thing. So we will have to be moving money around.
What's your sense of this virus? Because, frankly, you've been a little bit more reassuring today than some of the conversations that I've seen in the media. How serious a threat? How seriously should people be worried about it? And what is the prognosis? Is this something that's going to be with us for years, or?
If it acts like a similar infection called dengue, which is transmitted by the same type of mosquito, exactly the same type of mosquito, and you look what's happened in Brazil and in the Caribbean, dengue has been around for several years now. I don't predict that this is going to be a one-off and be gone. That's the issue. The issue of being concerned and how concerned we are, you have to be prepared for something like this. It may be something that may be a small chance of a wide outbreak, but as long as there is a chance, if you get caught without being prepared, then you have a real problem. And that's the reason why we emphasize the need, not for concern, but the need for preparation.
Dr. Fauci, thank you. Thanks for your time today. We'll stay on top of this story. It's an important one. Thank you. Up next, we'll bring back the panel to discuss the saber rattling as Russian attack jets buzz a U.S. warship in the Baltic Sea. Plus, what would you like to ask the panel about that provocation and the threat posed by Vladimir Putin? Just go to Facebook or Twitter at Fox News Sunday, and we may use your question on the air. Alarming video this week of Russian attack jets repeatedly buzzing a U.S. Navy destroyer in the Baltic Sea. The Russian warplanes flew 31 passes over 2 days, coming at least on one pass within 30 feet of the ship. And we're back now with the panel. Well, we asked you for questions for our Sunday group, and we got a bunch of questions from you for the panel on these provocations. Jan PC sent this on Facebook. Why wasn't Putin given a message that if this happens again, he will be looking in the ocean for his planes? We are so weak. And William J. Smith tweeted this: what would Putin do if we buzzed one of their ships? George, how do you answer William and Jan, and what do you make of the Russian actions and the U.S. response?
Well, it's a very good question, because the destroyer Donald Cook was further than 70 miles from Soviet Russian territory, so there's no question about this being a provocation. During the Cold War, I think it was Henry Kissinger likened the Soviet Union to a burglar that goes down a hallway in a hotel trying all the doorknobs to see if he can find one that's unlocked. This is that kind of constant probing we got used to. Astonishingly, to me at least, Secretary of State Kerry said under the rules of engagement, this would have justified our shooting down that plane. I would love to know what those rules of engagement are, because this is pertinent to what's going on daily in the South China Sea, where the United States is testing, sort of in the semi-aggressor role here, and should be, we're testing the claims made by the Chinese about their rights over territorial waters surrounding the islands they're manufacturing and militarizing. So this is a new sphere of superpower, 3 or 4 superpowers, confronting one another.
What should we have done?
I think we should have elaborated on what Mr. Kerry said, that if the rules of engagement say we can shoot this plane down, the Russians should know that.
Let me ask you, Julie, because as George just pointed out, you got Kerry taking a very strong stand about what at least we could have done, not what we did do. And then you had the White House spokesman, Josh Earnest, saying that this raises serious safety concerns and basically strong letter to follow to the Russians. Any second thoughts at the White House about how they handled this?
I don't think second thoughts about how they handled this particular incident. It's a very difficult situation because on the one hand, you see this video and to actually see how close these planes are getting, it's very unnerving. Yet you're
and honestly, you know, I mean, we can sit there and say, well, it was a provocation. You didn't know as that plane is heading over the horizon what its intent was.
30 times. So on the one hand, it's very unnerving to see this happen. You also, though, don't expect that the U.S. military action and probably to experts, yes, they'll raise ISIS, yes, they'll raise Iran as big concerns, but what's happening in these waters around the world between Russia, the U.S., and China, it is potentially a really scary situation.
When you talk to your sources, was there any discussion about let's put more troops in the Baltics to at least say, hey, look, you know, you want to be provocative with us? We're going to show you that we're not going to be cowed.
It didn't seem like this provoked that kind of response. I think that Putin could use this as a tactic that he could keep pressing to see how far he could go before he does get some kind of response, but no sign that this what we saw the last couple of days is going to provoke that response.
Rebecca, there's also a political component to this because Clinton was one of the architects of the Russian reset when she was Secretary of State. Our effort, apparently, at least in the long term, having failed to improve and warm up relations with Russia. Do you see this, just not only the Russian issue, but her whole record as Secretary of State being a problem for her, not necessarily just an unalloyed success for her as we get into the general election?
Well, Republicans certainly hope to make it so. Her campaign, and Republicans really see her experience as Secretary of State on foreign policy as potentially her greatest asset in a general election because none of her assets set Libya, Syria, Iran, these countries where she was hoping, and the president was hoping, frankly, to make them more stable, and instead they have veered more into instability, and Russia has veered more into provoking the U.S. as opposed to the opposite, which was the goal of the Russia reset. Republicans, by highlighting these issues and highlighting Hillary Clinton's performance on these issues, could turn her experience into a liability, potentially.
Laura, I want to turn to another hot spot. President Obama travels to Saudi Arabia this week, and there was a fascinating story in the New York Times yesterday that top Saudi officials have said that they are prepared to sell off hundreds of billions of dollars in Russia and their assets that they have here in the United States if Congress goes ahead and passes a law that basically says that Saudi officials, the Saudi government, could be liable in any suits involving 9/11 and the role they might have played in 9/11. Your thoughts about that?
Well, it's dangerous for the United States, frankly, to go into so much debt where we're borrowing money, and we're printing these treasury bills, borrowing money, obviously huge amount of money from China, but obviously Saudi Arabia, $750 million isn't a drop in the bucket. It's $750 million. Now, whether Saudi Arabia will do this or not, we don't really know. It would actually hurt them to do it. However, the more interesting thing about all of this is what's come out of those redacted 28 pages from the 9/11 Commission when we find out for sure that in San Diego, 2 of the 9/11 hijackers were facilitated out of the Saudi embassy. There's a flurry of phone calls. That information has been leaked out of that report. I think the American people need to know those 28 pages should be released.
Let me just briefly explain. Actually, it wasn't the 9/11 Commission. It was a congressional probe.
Yeah.
In 2002, there was a congressional probe about 9/11. the year before, and 28 pages of that are still classified all these years later, and that reportedly may link some Saudi officials, individual officials, to support for the 9/11 hijackers. What makes this especially interesting is the 9/11 Commission, separate group from the congressional probe, said this. It found, quote, no evidence that the Saudi government as an institution or senior Saudi officials individually funded the organization, meaning al-Qaeda. I got to say, Julie, that looks like it was written by a lawyer and couldn't be more narrowly worded.
Absolutely. And when you look at the complex relationship that we have with Saudi Arabia right now, President Obama is going to be there this coming week, his 4th visit as president. This has been a question that has hung over this relationship a long time. You will have officials that will say things like, well, we know there was them, but they always stop short of saying that it was actually orchestrated by the government or senior people within the government. And when you know that there are 28 pages hanging out there that will clarify, presumably, what the ties were, I think that it could put the administration in a difficult spot if they're taking action to try to hold off on releasing that.
So Laura, I mean, just to go back to you, I mean, on the one hand, you've got members of Congress who want to pass this law that would make the Saudi government liable in court, and what we're particularly talking about here are families of the 9/11 victims who want to sue the Saudi government, which obviously has deep pockets, and then you've also got this kind of ticking time bomb, these 28 pages that a separate investigation conducted that may have evidence about what the Saudis did, and that up to this point the administration has refused to declassify.
Everyone should read Paul Sperry's piece in today's New York Post from the Hoover Institution. He goes through all of this meticulously. And Prince Bandar, a good friend of the Bushes, obviously on September 13th, shared cigars on the Truman balcony after 9/11. Prince Bandar, from some of the $130,000 from then Saudi ambassador Prince Bandar's family's checking account to yet another of the hijackers' Saudi handlers in San Diego. This stuff that's already come out of those 28 pages. We have to know what was in this. And if there's facilitation, which it certainly looks like, from some of these Saudi officials to the handlers who are helping the hijackers in San Diego. San Diego is where it looks like it happened. This is devastating. And why were we in such a rush to get these people out of the United States after 9/11? That's all in this piece. People should read it. It's complicated, but it's worth reading, because if we're engaged in this cover-up, then this goes back many years.
George, we have less than a minute left. Your thoughts about the Saudi role in 9/11 and what? Because it's a complicated issue. What should the U.S. do? What should the administration do?
Well, the United States should release this information, as the 9/11 Commission unanimously requested that they be released. When the investigations into 9/11 began, the primary question was it just a weird coincidence that 15 of 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia? The answer is, of course not. First, by funding Wahhabism, the radical Islami doctrine, and by, it's now clear, probably out of the Los Angeles Saudi consulate, they were helping these hijackers.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what comes up in the president's trip this week. Thanks, panel. See you next Sunday. Up next, our Power Player of the Week. A trailblazer in the Navy keeps breaking barriers. The military has traditionally been a man's world, but one woman has broken the brass ceiling and wants to help future generations follow her path. Here's our Power Player of the Week.
I'm a de facto role model. When you're the first, there's obligations that go with that.
Michelle Howard knows all about firsts. She was the first African-American woman to command a ship, the first female 4-star in the Navy, and now the first woman to be Vice Chief of Naval Operations, the branch's #2 job.
For any woman in any occupation where there hasn't been opportunity before, it's the belief that you can get to it, you can succeed.
Howard's journey started when she was 12. After watching a show on the military academies, she told her mother that's what she wanted to do. Her mom said girls weren't allowed.
And she said, but I'll tell you what, when you're older and you still want to go ahead and apply, and then if you get rejected, we'll sue the government.
Really?
She did.
But by 1978, women were attending the Naval Academy, and Howard was in the 3rd co-ed class to graduate. Do you feel that you kind of hit it right, that you entered the military just at the time doors were opening?
Oh, Absolutely. I have often said my parents were smart to birth me in 1960.
She served in the Persian Gulf during Operation Desert Storm. And after the law changed in 1993, she was on combat ships. But there were still some rough waters.
An officer said, you need to get out. You need to go where women are accepted. No, I'm an officer. I want to serve my country. I want to defend the Constitution.
In 1999, she was assigned to command the USS Rushmore. And 10 years later, she took over Task Force 151, fighting pirates in the Gulf of Aden. How long were you in that job before?
Captain Phillips was kidnapped about 3 days.
Howard ran the operation to stop the Somali pirates and rescue the captain.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank God, he's safe.
But even when she was named a full admiral 2 years ago,
Protect and defend the Constitution.
There were still obstacles.
I said, hey, I need women 4-star shoulder boards. And she goes, there aren't any.
They never needed one before.
These are all secretaries of the Navy.
And how many women are there?
Oh, there's never been a woman secretary of the Navy.
As Vice Chief, Howard makes sure the Navy can meet its war-fighting requirements now and in the future. Is part of your responsibility the role of getting women more integrated into command?
It's part of who I am.
And she's come to a conclusion. Women need to be a quarter of the unit to turn them from tokens into part of the team. 25%.
Yeah. Once you get to a sort of critical mass, then the organization sort of reflects the larger society at whole.
Women now make up 19% of the Navy. Howard says she'll keep pushing.
I want to continue to be in leadership roles where I can serve my sailors and make a difference in their ability to be effective warfighters and in their ability to succeed as individuals.
Admiral Howard has a few years left in her military career, and there are reports the president is considering her to lead Navy forces in Europe. Once she retires, she says she looks forward to trout fishing back home in Colorado. Now, this program note. Be sure to tune to Fox News Channel Tuesday for full coverage of those big New York primaries. And that's it for today. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Fox News Sunday.